Speaker. The Education Authority has not changed this process for parental referrals for statutory assessments. Article 20 of the Education Order 1996 clearly sets out the duty on the Education Authority to comply with a request from a parent or carer to arrange an assessment of special educational needs for a child. Following the introduction of the Special Educational Needs and Disability Act Northern Ireland 2016, the emergent Code of Practice asks that the Education Authority provide a standard pro forma for referral for use by a relevant party. The Education Authority launched the standard pro forma in May 2021 via an online portal. This is for schools, health professionals, educational psychologists and parents carers to access in their capacity as a relevant party to a child and to request or refer a child for a statutory assessment of special educational needs. This process remains live online for all of the relevant parties to access, with specific support available via the Education Authority Special Educational Needs Helpline or from the Educational Authority's Psychology Service for those parents or carers who wish to progress a direct request for assessment for their child.
Thank you. I thank the Minister for his fulsome answer. I asked the question because in my constituency office I have noticed an increased number of appeals to decisions made by the EAA to statutory assessments. Can I ask the Minister, essentially what I'm looking for is an assurance that these important assessments haven't been limited or reduced and that the educational needs of the child will always take precedence over budgetary issues?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's obviously statutory obligations when it comes to the processing of statements of education. That has been borne out in terms of the additional spend the Department has had to make over the past number of years with the exponential growth around this particular area. So the member can be assured this is a priority for the Department when it comes to assessments being carried out. The greater accessibility of an online portal and greater awareness of that, I think, is a good thing because it is allowing people to register these issues. Obviously, the processing of it then needs to be carried out effectively, but this is a priority for the Department.
And thank the Minister for his answer so far. I just want to ask if there is any plan within the Department to tackle the shortage of educational psychologists and speech and language therapists that are required to progress those statement applications in a timely fashion.
Well, the member, Mr. Speaker, raises an important point in terms of having a workforce that's available to carry out these processes, and that is a challenge in terms of making sure that there is a workforce. We are aware of that, and obviously it's important that we can recruit people into these roles to be able to carry out the functions that they need to perform.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, in which circumstances are the EA likely to refuse a statutory assessment request by the parent?
Well, obviously there's issues around making sure that the information provided is there, and often it is that ability to garner the appropriate evidence that becomes the challenge. So where there is evidence, then that allows the assessment to take place, and those are some of the circumstances where maybe that hasn't been carried out because of the lack of evidence in that respect.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, do you think the Education Authority is fit for purpose, and if not, when do you plan to do something about it? Because on this issue, it is certainly not fit for purpose.
Happy to come back to that particular question, Mr. Speaker, in due course. £150 million of funding previously earmarked for Fresh Start projects has been placed in the UK Government's financial settlement for the Executive. In addition, construction costs for the Fresh Start projects have risen considerably in recent years. The remaining Fresh Start funding is therefore sufficient only to cover those projects currently in construction contract. To give a clarity to the remaining Fresh Start projects not yet in contract, they will now be delivered within my department's conventional major works programme and will continue to advance in design and planning. I hope this will provide reassurance to the schools on the immediate way forward. I have also written to the Secretary of State to set out the strategic importance of this programme for Northern Ireland and to seek additional capital funding for these projects.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is devastating news for the schools affected, and I have to say the news was delivered in a rather abysmal way by the Department, and the Minister's response will be cold comfort. Would the Minister agree with me that investing in integrated education is public service transformation, and therefore will he now commit to reallocate that money back to its original purpose so that schools like Millennium Primary School, which have commenced on site, can still proceed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure where the member has been. I highlighted that this was a real cause for concern day one in office when it came to the budget allocations for my department. This has been flagged long in advance of even devolution being restored, that the way in which the UK government was treating the Fresh Start money was going to create difficulties for us. So this is not something new, but I would say to the member, his own leader, whenever it came to the restoration of these institutions, and I quote, in terms of getting back into Stormont around the financial package, I think we're looking a gift horse in the mouth here by refusing to actually grasp that money and bank that money at this stage. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the member's party was wrong when it came to the financial package. We outlined that the financial package was nowhere near suffice, and yet the Alliance Party and others said, get back in, let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm clear, and my actions are clear. I have moved these schools into the conventional programme rather than pausing, rather than cancelling them, not because I've let them down, but because the Secretary of State and the UK Government has let them down. They've moved into the conventional programme, they'll continue to be advanced, and I'm making the case to the Secretary of State for the funding to be provided. I hope the member's party and the leader will join me in my efforts to try and support these projects rather than play cheap party political politics over it.
I ask the Minister, and I understand the extreme pressure that your budget is under, but can you give us a commitment that the business case for the non-teaching staff pay and grading review will be with the Finance Department as soon as possible?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member raises an important issue in terms of the support staff. Vitally important that that business case is finalised. Department of Finance are continuing to look at aspects of it, but there have been issues raised both from the Education Authority and then within the Department of Education and Department of Finance in respect to that business case. I have made clear that I want this to be prioritised so that we can complete that business case, and then obviously that will allow the Finance Minister to take an informed view on this, which could feed into then the next financial year. So that is something that I am seeking to progress, because it is important that that pay and grading review comes to a successful conclusion and that we can resolve these issues.
Indeed, the MP for North Antrim, Ian Paisley, has spoken to you of late about how important Ballycastle Shared Campus is to the local area. Can you provide an update on this vital project, which was part of the Fresh Start agreement?
Mr. Speaker, I can. I know the Member of Parliament for North Antrim over the weekend, when this announcement was made at the tail end of last week, expressed his concern in terms of the proposals in Ballycastle. I can assure the member and indeed the Member of Parliament for North Antrim that Ballycastle Shared Education Campus is proceeding. Let me just provide an update for members. There are 9 projects that are contractually now committed, which the Treasury have said they will support. They are Ulidia Integrated College, Newbridge Integrated College, Shimna Integrated College, Phoenix Integrated Primary School, Millstrand Integrated Primary School, Park Hall Integrated College, Rowandale Integrated Primary School, Strangford Integrated College, and the school that the member has raised, Ballycastle Shared Education Campus. These schools amount to around £266 million, which is contractually committed to by the Treasury. They will be proceeding. My action is to make sure that those other schools that are not able to proceed are able to advance by being moved into the conventional major capital programme of my department.
Thank the Minister for his answer so far. Could the Minister give us an update in terms of the impact that the funding cut announcements will have on the new build project for Fortell Integrated College in his own constituency of Lagan Valley?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and this is one of the schools that will continue to advance in the planning phase, because rather than it being cancelled as a result of the UK Government and the Secretary of State's position on this. I have moved it into the conventional major capital programme, but it is not one of those schools which we're contractually committed to. There are a number of these schools are at various different stages, but because of the action that I've taken, they will continue to advance. That, however, will be subject to the necessary capital becoming available when they get to the point of being at a state of readiness for construction. It then will be for the Department of Education, but also the wider executive, to ensure that the necessary capital is available for these schools and all of the other schools to be taken forward.
Minister, I'm mindful nearly a decade ago this funding was promised for shared and integrated education, and yet this money has been removed with little thought for schools, teachers and pupils. Can you tell me exactly when you as Minister and other executive ministers became aware that this money would be reallocated?
Well, this was part of the financial package that the UK Government then presented as part of that £3.3 billion. And that capital funding, which was still outstanding out of Fresh Start for shared education, integrated and shared housing schemes, was then placed into the totality of that package. So the ring fencing that was there for Fresh Start is no longer there. And just to give some more figures to this for the House, Mr. Speaker, it was in 2018 when the totality of all of these projects were announced, and that came to £483 million. As of today, that figure sits at £925 million because of the rising costs of inflation in the construction industry. So that shows the quantum of funding in terms of the increase that is necessary. What was committed so far is the £266 million for those schools, and there are some who have also completed. So I'm happy to place into the library, if it's beneficial for members, the correspondence, and I'll do that I've entered into with the Secretary of State, where I make it very clear that if the UK Government is serious, as I am, about shared and integrated education, well then the announcement that they made in 2018 is no longer fit for purpose, and they need to provide the funding that is available, which was originally envisaged under Fresh Start, to this executive, and I will continue to make that case, and I hope others will join me in making it. Of the eligibility criteria for free school meals and uniform grants continues to examine a range of options for increasing the numbers of children and young people who are able to access free school meals and uniform grants. The options being considered include raising the income thresholds that apply to some of the means tested criteria, the introduction of universal free school meals provision to pupils in some school years, and options that are a combination of the two. The arrangements for the provision of milk, meals and related facilities made under the provisions of Articles 58 and 59 of the Education Libraries Order 1986 set out the eligibility criteria that apply to the provision of free school meals. While it will be dependent on the detail of any change to the eligibility criteria, any changes are likely to be able to be made through the revision of these arrangements, and as a result, no additional legislation is anticipated. In relation to uniform grants, the eligibility criteria are very similar to the criteria for free school meals. These are detailed within the EA's Clothing Allowance Scheme under Article 60 of the same order. And as with free schools meals, it is anticipated that any change in the eligibility criteria will be able to be taken forward as a revision to this scheme, and therefore would not require legislative change. So I will be considering the next steps on this review in the time ahead, and in doing so I will take account of the potential budgetary implications of any change in the eligibility criteria.
Mr. Donnelly.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answer. He'd mentioned a couple of options there that he's looking at. I'm just wondering if he's considering implementing a cap on school uniform cost.
Mr. Speaker, that's one of the issues that I will be engaging further with the Department on in terms of the cost of uniforms. There is guidance that was provided to schools in terms of this issue. It is one that comes up every year, and I again appeal to schools. If they were following the guidance, legislation wouldn't be necessary in this area. because it is a prohibitive factor for some families whenever they're even choosing what school they go to. And this doesn't just apply to school uniforms. You will have children who may be in a multiplicity of different sports clubs within the school, and they have to have the different kits associated with that. And whenever it comes to the branded type clothing material, that can come to a very significant amount of money. Cost should not be a prohibitor of what school a child goes to, and we need to be cognizant of that reality for a lot of families across Northern Ireland.
Clark.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your answer. In relation to your last response, you talked about the grants in terms of uniform, and you talked about the guidance. But it's clear that some of the schools are not following the guidance. So, as a minister, can you outline what your plans are going forward, given that the schools aren't following the guidance in relation to school uniforms and removal of some of the costs that you referred to?
Mr. Speaker, the member is right in terms of some schools that aren't following the guidance. I should say that a considerable majority do follow the guidance, but obviously I want all schools to follow this. So my officials have been carrying out significant work on the issue to identify possible solutions. A pre-consultation exercise has taken place, engaging with a wide range of stakeholders. A public consultation launching in late spring will gather stakeholder views in areas such as the need for statutory guidance in relation to school uniforms, particularly around the cost and affordability of school uniforms, the use of branded items and sole supplier arrangements.
Baker. Does the Minister have plans to reinstate the school holiday food grant scheme and put it on a statutory footing?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have asked for an assessment to be provided to me in respect of what would be commonly known as the holiday hunger payments. Members will know that that came to an end on the 31st of March last year because of financial budgetary pressures within the Department of Education. So I have asked for an assessment in terms of this issue to be provided to me, and it does cut across into other departments as well, because obviously Department for Communities, for example, has a role when it comes to the anti-poverty strategy, and I think it's important that we look at this in its totality, but I have asked for a report to be provided to me on this issue from officials that I can then consider.
Well, Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department is currently considering the report produced by the Independent Review Panel and carrying out internal consultation to inform a way forward. This process includes discussion with key education stakeholders, including other relevant departments and arm's-length bodies. Following this consultation, officials will produce a paper for my consideration, setting out advice on the various recommendations in the report. It is anticipated that this paper will be available by the end of April, and I hope to be in a position to respond to the paper before the summer, at which point I should have a clear understanding of the budget available to my department.
Thank you, Minister. Recommendation 21 in the review is to promote learners learning together, including shared and integrated. I declare an interest as a parent at one of the schools affected who will have its funding cut by what was announced last week. Have he and other executive parties agreed a package of funding which devastates capital funding and investment for shared and integrated education?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I am putting forward, and I did so on day one in this Assembly, I brought a ministerial statement to the House setting out my ambitious capital plans for the department. I said that I would be bidding for £528 million. That is more than doubling the capital spend that has ever been carried out within the Department of Education. I have an executive paper there for consideration, I trust this Thursday, in respect of the Strual shared campus, something that I want to see advanced, and we need to get a positive outcome at Thursday's meeting in respect of this. I was at Limavady along with the First and Deputy First Minister in respect of the shared campus there. I'm taking forward the Ballycastle shared campus project. There are a range of integrated schools that are progressing as part of that contractual obligation that I have just outlined of the 266 million. So I want to make sure that we have the capital available for major capital works, but as I indicated in that statement to the House, We need to see curriculum-led DVED capital investment, so we need to see smaller scale capital projects. We have a huge problem in terms of the investment needed in special educational needs provision and providing those support classes and infrastructure in order to mainstream children that want to go into mainstream education. So my ambition is to represent every sector of our education system, and I'm putting forward bids to the executive for that. The challenge will be for my executive colleagues. Do they share the same ambition that I have for every sector of our education system? And if they do, then I will be able to make significant progress across every aspect of our education system.
At the launch of the report by the independent review, the chair of the panel, Keir Bloomer, conceded to me that the education system here lags way behind the education system in the House or in the South in terms of educational attainment. Can the Minister tell us what he's going to do to address the high levels of educational underachievement in this jurisdiction?
Well, the member is right to raise the concerns, particularly in areas where there's multiple deprivation for those that come from a more disadvantaged background, and there needs to be the support in those areas to give children that opportunity, which in other parts of our society they are able to flourish and reach their full potential. So I share with him that agenda in terms of trying to make sure resource goes into the areas most in need. And where there is best practice to do that, if it's in the Republic of Ireland, I will happily look at that, and where I can learn from it, we'll take that forward. Or in any other part of the United Kingdom, I want to make sure that we can get best practice and then get the necessary resources to be able to invest.
Sir, is there a timescale of implementation for the recommendation of this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's planned that an options paper will be available for my consideration by the end of April, and following consideration of that report, I will decide on the scope and priority of an implementation plan in light of the wider financial pressures and constraints under the Department is operating.
Question 5 has been withdrawn. Question 6, Mr. Carroll is in his seat. Call Mr. Stuart Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There has been significant engagement with stakeholders groups and preschool settings in respect of the standardisation of preschool sessions as part of the wider early learning and childcare strategy engagement. A stakeholder engagement forum was established in autumn 2022 to ensure maximum engagement and to assist with the development of costed options for an early learning and childcare strategy. My department also commissioned an independent, in-depth scoping study to assess the state of readiness of the preschool sector to transition to a standardised 22.5 hours per week. This involved detailed surveys for every funded preschool education setting. The scoping study is nearing completion. In addition, my officials also carried out extensive engagement in regard to the amalgamation for standardisation pilot. The information gathered will be used to inform further decisions and plans for the phased implementation of standardisation for all preschools, and to inform the development of costed options for standardisation for the Executive. It is essential that we have input from a wide range of stakeholders as we take forward this work, and I am committed to ongoing and meaningful engagement.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. Minister, given the advancement of the plans that you've outlined to the House, can you tell us what the capital investment needs are for those preschool settings in order to facilitate the meeting of those requirements?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the full detailed costs of standardisation will depend on a range of factors, some of which decisions have yet to be taken on. It will also be informed by the scoping study that's due to report at the end of March, and I'll engage with the Executive colleagues on this in due course. However, to give a figure to the member, we have estimated that standardisation is likely to cost approximately an extra £35 million per year when fully operational, with additional upfront and one-off capital costs of approximately £10 million plus human resources. So that is on top of the £65 million which the current programme costs annually.
Knowing the issues with the workforce in early years settings, has the Minister considered a workforce strategy as part of this engagement with childcare settings?
Well, Mr Speaker, the member does raise a point which has already been highlighted to me by childcare providers. The ability to attract and retain people in the workforce is a real challenge. So that is an issue that does need to be taken into account in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So there is a childcare strategy stakeholder engagement forum as well. I will be seeking to engage with them as well as other organisations that are making provision in this area, because we need to make sure that in providing appropriate childcare that we have the workforce available to make that provision.
Stephen Dunn. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Minister how long will it take for all sessions to move to the 22.5 hours?
Mr Speaker, this will be dependent on executive approvals and availability of funding. There will be a number of options set out in the scoping study. Decisions then taken on these will impact on the speed of transition to a standardised session length. Some preschool settings will be in a position to transition to the standardised session length very quickly, while others will take much longer. It's likely to be a number of years before standardisation is fully implemented, with all funded preschool settings moved to 22.5 hours per week.
Next question is Connie Egan. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Department of Education and the Education Authority embarked on an end-to-end review of special educational needs in early 2023 to examine the entire special educational needs system from a policy perspective to ensure delivery and outcomes are in line with objectives and policy intent. Phase 1 of the review is complete, which involved scoping the review and establishing appropriate governance structures. Phase 2 has commenced and primarily focuses on stakeholder engagement to ensure that all decisions and solutions are underpinned by meaningful engagement. In addition to targeted engagement with individuals and organisations, a programme of engagement events is currently being developed for schools, parents and carers, children and young people and wider stakeholders, so that they can share their knowledge and experience to be part of co-designing a more agile and improved special educational needs system. Following this engagement phase, an action plan will be developed for implementation, and I expect this implementation plan to be ready for September 2024. The overall vision for the end-to-end review is to ensure that all children with special educational needs get the right support delivered by the right people at the right time and in the right place through a high-quality education which is cost-effective and improves outcomes.
The Minister for his answer. Minister, will you give assurances to pupils and parents that children with special educational needs will not be sitting at the start of the academic year in September still unaware of which school they're going to, like has happened in previous years?
Well, Mr Speaker, can I thank the member for raising this point, because in October of 2023, so last year, following what happened in the previous academic year, a strategic placement group was established within the department. That meets every week. It has the Deputy Permanent Secretary level engagement. We also had the creation of the Director of Special Educational Needs Placements created. It was a new post in January of 2024. And that is a forum which meets at the highest levels, and they are meeting every week on this issue, because we recognise that there is a real challenge coming in September. I cannot, and I wish I could, give a guarantee that every child will have a placement by then. I don't believe that's going to be the case, despite the urgency and the priority that I'm placing on this within my department. But I want to provide some reassurance, Mr Speaker, to the House and to parents, and we'll touch on this in the substantive part of the motion that we have in front of us later this afternoon. This is a priority for me, and I do want to be able to provide the support that is necessary. But I've came into office where there is very real pressures and challenges in this area, but I'm very much committed to doing all that I can to help.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I wish to ask the Minister, when does he think that the new special educational needs framework will be fully implemented?
Well, Mr Speaker, following public consultation of the draft new SEN regulations and code of practice in 2021. Several changes have been made to both documents which take on board the views of those that responded. The new regulations are in the final stages of drafting, and once all the necessary approvals are in place, they will be presented to the Education Committee before being placed before the Assembly for consideration. So my officials are working closely with the Education Authority regarding a timetable for commencing each provision within the SEN Disability Act of 2016 and associated SEN regulation. That Act places additional duties on the EA and on boards of governors in schools, including the appointment of a learning support coordinator, and for each child on the SEN register to have a personal learning plan. Agreed additional funding of £30 million per annum has been identified to support schools to implement the legislative changes, but due to budget constraints, only £11 million was made available to schools for 23-24 year, and unless the full amount is made available in future years, then it will negatively impact on the outcomes of children with special educational needs.
I move to topical questions. I call Cara Hunter.
Minister, just to bring back there the recent changes to the Fresh Start funding in integrated schools. Many of those schools listening today will have engaged in tendered contracts and years of planning processes. Can you give any assurances today to those in integrated school communities that the capital funding they were promised a decade ago will be replaced?
Well, I can't give that commitment, but what I can give a commitment to is my determination to make every representation possible with the United Kingdom Government when it comes to what they announced in 2018, that they should honour that in terms of the increased cost associated with these projects. And I will also be making an ambitious capital bid, which I've outlined to this House, to my executive colleagues in order to take forward the capital works associated not just with these schemes that were under Fresh Start, but across the totality of my department. And that doesn't come in year one. A lot of these schools are at different phases of development, and that can be profiled over a longer period of time, subject to the various processes being complete. But I will continue to make the case for the funding that is necessary for these schemes under Fresh Start, but all of the other schemes within my department's conventional major capital programme.
Ms Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for his answer. Just on that then, Minister, can you give your assessment as to how this funding reallocation will impact the completion dates and timelines for these schools? And will you commit to meeting with some of the principals to discuss these issues further?
Well, I'm happy to meet with schools. There is an extensive list of schools that have asked to meet with me, and colleagues here in this House that have asked me to engage on different projects. So, it's my intention to be as accessible as possible to members of this House, but also right across the Department of Education's responsibilities in terms of engaging with schools. But bear with me in terms of the very considerable number of requests that are in for me to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, what engagement are you planning to have with the UK Secretary of State for Education?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be engaging and speaking with the UK Secretary of State for Education, Gillian Keegan, later this week, where I will have an opportunity to highlight some of these issues that we've talked about today, but also to raise the issues contained within the Safeguarding the Union agreement that my party secured with the UK Government. And within that, members will see, when it comes to East-West relations, a focus on educational matters, and that is something that I will be pressing on the UK Secretary of State to develop with me, so that we can deliver upon those commitments that the UK Government entered into.
I very much thank the Minister for his answers here today. Minister, can you also outline, are there plans to meet with the Scottish and Welsh Education Ministers?
Mr. Speaker, yes, I will be hosting a joint educational meeting of my counterparts from the devolved parliaments. Arrangements are being made for that to take place, I think, in April, so that we can share best practice, and I'll certainly be doing that in terms of my engagement with colleagues in other jurisdictions within the United Kingdom.
Bradley.
Speaker, can I ask the Minister, in view of so many topics or many questions asked today about budget, Could he provide us with his budget position for next year, and does he think his budget is enough?
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the member for that question? In terms of the budgetary position for my department, prior to the allocation of additional funding from the financial package that the Treasury announced, our department's resource DEL budget bottom line was 2.582 billion, sorry, 2.582 million in that respect. So that's 2,582 million. Obviously, there were some further allocations as part of the financial package that came to 296.8 million, and that is to help in terms of some of the costs over the past financial year, but also when it comes to the teaching pay awards dispute and providing a resolution to that. Members will know that I have outlined, even in this question time, the vast range of budgetary pressures that sits within the Department of Education. And this is because of the needs within our constituencies that individuals have in order to get the support that they need. So what I will be putting forward for the Finance Minister's consideration and ultimately the Executive would be to increase the overall requirement of my department to £3 billion 594 million. That is a £1 billion uplift that my department needs to meet the objectives that we have, and that will be going forward as part of the budgetary process for next year.
Call Mr. Bradley. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has partly answered my supplementary, and that is, does he think that he will get the support of his executive colleagues in increasing his budget, considering that so many around the House from all parties have put pressure on him to do so?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it certainly will put the challenge with executive colleagues when it comes to the bid that I'll be putting forward, if they are able to match that ambition. But it also does, Mr. Speaker, put into stark focus why my party leader at the time of these discussions with the government said it was not enough. Other parties said get the executive back up and running. Our position was constitutional. It was not based on financial considerations, but we did make it clear this would not be enough. Others said we can fight this fight from within. I quoted to Mr. Tennyson what his party leader said at the time, and I look forward to seeing how that strategy is effective when it comes to securing the additional funding that was needed. But we have outlined from day one as a party we are underfunded. That needs to be corrected, and we will continue to make that representation to the Treasury.
Cathal Boylan is in his seat. I call Andy Allen.
Speaker, Minister, during a recent meeting with the Youth Work Alliance, they highlighted quite the contrast in the funding provided to the statutory and voluntary youth service providers. And if I can just give you a flavour of that, the community and voluntary sector provided youth service provision to 117,418 children, whereas the statutory provided youth service provision to 91,795. That equated to roughly £97.90 for the voluntary sector, whereas the statutory sector was over £254. Will the Minister commit to reviewing this?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member does raise a point that is worthy of consideration in terms of the most effective use of public resources, and the voluntary sector does provide excellent support to our children and young people, and that is something that I want to see supported, and they did face significant reductions in their budget during the period when Stormont wasn't up and running. Obviously, subject to all of the budgetary requirements that my department has, I want to make sure that we are able to support that community voluntary use. He does raise issues about the comparison with the statutory and the value for money in that respect, and that is certainly worthy of further consideration and assessment.
Minister, in highlighting the excellent work provided by our community and voluntary organisations, will you commit to joining with me in my constituency of East Belfast to meet with the Ledley Hall Youth and Boxing Club and other providers to hear firsthand the impactful work that they're carrying out?
Well, whether that's Department of Education or Communities, but nevertheless, we can follow up on that invitation and make sure that there can be an appropriate meeting set up for the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, we've talked today about various options that you have at looking at lowering the cost of accessing education for families across Northern Ireland. I'm just wanting to know, one of the other things that you mentioned was cross-departmental working, if you have any plans to work with any other ministers in order to lower the cost of accessing education.
Well, Mr. Speaker, certainly when it comes to collaboration with executive colleagues, that is something that does take place in a number of areas. I can think of the skills agenda, and there are a framework in place with the Department for Economy, for example, because of that overlap between the age of 16 moving into 17, 18, 19. So that requires collaboration, and importantly, when it comes to the early years, early year learning and childcare strategy, that does require effective collaboration across a whole range of departments, and I've already put forward a paper to the executive and got agreement to set up a group which includes the Department of Health, for example, which has an important role in this, the Department for Economy as well, because of the employability aspect of this, the Department for Communities, and I've no doubt the Department of Finance is going to have an interest. So where there is collaboration, absolutely I will work with executive colleagues to try and take that forward.
Mr. Speaker, we've already heard about holiday hunger today, and I think it was asked already by the member from West Belfast. I'm just wondering what other steps the department will take to try and alleviate holiday hunger going forward. Thank you.
Well, the member will know the response that I provided to Mr. Baker earlier in respect of the report that I am awaiting on that. Obviously, where there is budget available, the department is going to be able to do much more. This is a scheme which did end last year. The annual contribution towards that was approximately £20 million per year. So, in considering all of these things, obviously there are budget constraints, but there is very clearly a policy objective of trying to help people who need that help. And that needs to be what guides my department in terms of the bid that we would be making around the financial resources for our department next year.
Will the Minister make reform of careers advice in schools a priority?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. How much advice and guidance will go into our young people to become politicians, I don't know. I didn't need advice or guidance on that whenever I was at school. It was something that I always wanted to do. But the member makes an important point in terms of getting the right careers advice. And you know, it isn't always about pursuing academic qualifications. There's the apprenticeships and trade, and making sure that what qualifications you come out with will ultimately lead you to getting a job. And too often, and I was one of these people, albeit I went into politics, you know, whenever I graduated with my degree in business studies, so too did hundreds of other people. And when it came to then seeking employment, you know, what set the individual apart from other people whenever it was a generalised type of qualification. So the member's right to raise this around getting careers advice and the right advice, and also making sure our curriculum aligns towards the needs of our economy.
Sir, and we heard earlier from the Minister for Economy the need for collaborative working and the overlap, and you've already referenced that in some of your answers today. So would you consider working collaboratively and commit to a joint action plan with the Economy Minister on the issue of careers advice in schools?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will be meeting with the Minister for Economy. We've already discussed this issue around the need to have that collaboration, and we will be setting about that meeting and then seeing what more we can do in this area.
Challenges on all aspects of the education budget. But could the Minister perhaps provide some information in relation to future capital investment in the IODIS centres?
Well, the member raises an important issue, Mr. Speaker, around the capital requirements that are needed, whether it's in IODIS or in other aspects of the education system. That's why the bid that I have going forward is a very ambitious bid, because of the capital needs that exist.
Minister for his answer, and having visited and witnessed the commitment of staff who work with young people who do have challenges in settings which are not always fit for purpose, I would encourage the Minister to pay those centres a visit at his earliest opportunity. But further to that, could I ask the Minister for his assessment of the EODIS provision?
Well, again, can I thank the member for the question, and I'm more than happy to visit some of the areas that she's referenced in her question. There is an inadequacy in terms of some of our estate, and it requires capital investment. I've already witnessed that firsthand in some of the schools that I have visited. We have excellent schools, and we also have schools which are completely inappropriate for the 21st century, and that's going to require significant investment.
Thank you. That concludes questions to the Minister for Education.